2020. Now we start the sessions. The first session is a free paper session. For this, I welcome Dr. Gopi sir and Dr. Shivaram Krishna sir as the chairperson, sir. Sir, can we start the sessions now, sir?
Yeah, you please tell Sivaram Krishna sir.
Dr. Shivaram Krishna sir, so welcome to the session, sir. I request you to chair the session, sir.
Yeah.
Okay.
ఇంకా మిగిలిన ఇది
Seven Kumar, వాళ్ళ స్క్రీన్ షేర్ కమింగ్
మొత్తం చాలా ఉన్నా
వాళ్ళ స్క్రీన్ షేర్ చేస్తున్నారు కదా ఇంకేం రాదు.
నా పేపర్ ఉంది బుక్ ఇటువా
Hello. Good
Hello.
morning, sir. Hello. Good morning, sir.
గుడ్ మార్నింగ్
Sir, I'm Shravan, neurology resident from NIMS Hospital, sir. Can I start, sir?
Yeah. Sir,
Today
ఐ కెన్ స్టార్ట్.
yes, sir. My topic is prevalence of apathy and its correlation with nigrosomal imaging in patients with Parkinson's disease. Uh, Introduction. Apart from classic motor symptoms in Parkinson's disease, non-motor symptoms were also common. In this, apathy was the most bothersome symptom. And apathy was defined as a lack of motivation characterized by reduced emotional expression and diminished goal-oriented behavior. Apathy was associated with older age and worse cognitive function, increased motor symptoms, and more severe disability, and potentially with lower quality of life and increased caregiver burden. Uh, Relatives. The prevalence of apathy varies between the studies, which are around 17% to 60%, depending in various studies. Lilly apathy scale, apathy evaluation scale, and STARSkin apathy scale were approved by the MDS Society. Nigrosom 1 region contains largest portion of neurons which are affected in the Parkinson's disease that causes high signal WA signal in the nigrosom 1 region to be absent in patients with Parkinson's disease. Correlation of nigrosomal imaging in patients with APD with apathy and non-PD PD with non-apathy group was not clear. Methodology, it was a prospective single center cross-sectional study which was conducted in each hospital for a period of 1 year. It was approved by the Institutional Ethics Committee and written informed consent was obtained from all the patients. The patients with PD patients with other systemic diseases such as coronary heart disease, liver disease, renal failure, cognitive function, psychiatric disturbances were excluded from the study. The aim of the study was to assess the prevalence and severity of apathy in patients with idiopathic Parkinson's disease using Lilly apathy rating scale, and to see whether there is any correlation between the motor scores and non-motor scores versus apathy score. Assessment of clinical symptoms. Patients with are evaluated with Lilly apathy rating scale for apathy, and it was divided into PD with apathy group and PD with non-apathy group respectively. 9 individual domains were tested in Lilly apathy rating scale. Scores for each of them was -4 to +4. Maximum cumulative score was around 36, +36. Minimum score was around -36. The scoring criteria for apathy was severity was mild with a value of -21 to -17, and moderate -16 to -9, severe and greater than -9 to +36. In this study, we classified more than -16 as which includes more moderate and severe group as apathy, while those with minus less than 16 were classified as non-apathy group. Severity of the PD was evaluated by H&V stage, and they delivered by equivalent doses were calculated for all the patients. Motor severity was assessed using EPRS-3 on and off state, and other non-motor symptoms which appear prior to the motor symptoms, such as sleep disturbances, which are assessed using Parkinson's disease sleep scale and RLS rating scale to see whether any correlation. All the interviews were conducted on state to minimize the discomfort to the patient. Nigrosomal imaging which was performed in patients who gave consent for MRI imaging. The findings for MRI were classified on the base of three-tier system of classification to segregate the nigrosomal 1 imaging scans. The classification is which was classified into three groups, which was a group 1, which include normal nigrosome 1 visualization on MRI. Group B is abnormal nigrosome visualization, which is less than 50%, which is divided into group 2A and group 2B. Group 2A has asymmetrical abnormal in nigrosome 1 region, and group 2B has a symmetrical abnormal. Group B has L and R, which is on left side and right side. The findings on microsomal imaging were correlated with clinical features of Parkinson's disease and apathy scale. Data analysis, which was statistical analysis, was performed with SPSS Statistics version 19, and demographic variables, motor symptoms, non-motor symptoms, PDRS 3 and 5 scores, apathy scores on large, and PDSS score, and presence and absence of RLS was compared between PD and PD with apathy group and PD with non-apathy groups. The comparison of continuous variable was done using two-sided student t-test, and the comparison of frequencies were done based on chi-square test. ANOVA test was used to assess varying correlation with the severity of apathy. Nigrosomal imaging findings were correlated with apathy and side of onset of using chi-square test. P-value was less than 0.05, was taken as significant. Results. Age distribution, the mean age of population was around 56.14, with age ranges from 25 to 83 years of age. The predominant cohort was around 51 to 60 years of age. The mean age of onset of disease was around 49.4 years. Sex distribution, out of 100 subjects included in this study, 72 were the males and 28 were the females. Age of onset of distribution, predominant age of onset was between 41 to 50 years of age, which was around 40%, and followed by 51 to 60%, which is around 25%. The mean age of onset of disease was around 49.4 years. Duration of disease, the mean duration of disease were around 6.76%, with less than 5 years around 44%, and less 6 to 10 years around 39%. Core clinical criteria, bradykinesia was around 99% in this group, and tremors with 93%, and rigidity and 94%, coastal instability in 75% of patients. Other baseline characteristics, the most common was reduced facial expression. The next common was around slowness of gait. Apathy, according to large scale, apathy was present in around 28% of patients, and absent in other 72% of patients. Apathy grade 2 and grade 3 was around 14% each in each group, and patients with only mild signs of apathy was classified as grade 1, which was seen in 13% of subjects. Domains of Lilly apathy rating scale, the mean LRS score was around -20.60. The most affected domain was extension of novelty seeking, and the least affected part is blunting of emotional response with a mean of -2.89. In subscores of apathy, the intellectual curiosity was the most affected domain, which is around -1.99, and least affected subscore was around emotion, which is around a mean of -2.7. Demographic and motor symptoms versus apathy. Age, sex, age of onset of disease.
Shravan, you have 1 more minute. Shravan, you have
Yes,
1 more minute.
Almost completed. Duration of disease, UPDRS has no statistical difference between apathy and non-apathy group. Non-motor symptoms, there is no correlation between RLS and PDSS group. Normal versus in any grade of apathy, the mean of the patients who have no signs of apathy has easy to get up, alertness of 30 minutes after getting up, and morningness even of as compared with no signs of apathy, which has a statistical correlation, and the frequent awakening was more routine in patients with signs of apathy. Nigrosomal imaging was performed in 90% of subjects. There was no statistical significance between apathy scale and nigrosomal imaging in our subject. 40% has a bilateral symptoms, it's nigrosomal abnormality. In the remaining 50%, there was abnormality in opposite side of onset of Parkinson's disease symptom. Conclusion, apathy in Parkinson's disease was seen in 28% of our population. 14% of population has moderate and severe grades of apathy, and 13% of study population had mild signs of apathy, which was not considered as a disease state. Among the subscores of apathy, intellectual curiosity was the most affected, and the least affected was emotional subscore. There was no statistical significant difference between PD apathy group and non-PD apathy group with regards to age and age of onset, duration of symptoms, or UPDRS scores or clinical features. Nigrosomal imaging was abnormal in 90% of patients. There was no statistical difference between nigrosomal imaging with onset of disease or presence of absence of apathy. On comparison of normal patients with any grades of apathy, higher age, reduced alertness and awakening 30 minutes after awakening, longer time to get up in the morning.
Your time is over, Shravan.
Completed, sir. Apathy need limitation for study. Nigrosomal imaging was for only limited number of subjects, and symptoms of depression frequently overlap with apathy. We did not use separate scale for assessment of depression in our patients. Presence of underlying depression might have confounded the prevalence of apathy.
What is your take-home message? Everybody knows that apathy is common in PD. What do you want to convey?
The conveys patients with apathy. A patient with apathy, in our study, we want to study because of apathy, any correlation between nigrosomal imaging, whether there is abnormality on nigrosomal imaging, patient with PD and apathy groups. In our study, there was no such difference identified, maybe due to limited number of subjects.
How much percentage of cases you have nigrosomal imaging positive Parkinson's disease?
90%, sir. 90% abnormality was there, sir, in imaging.
Okay.
Any other studies?
Actually, there are few studies from India, sir, stating that these studies are about nigrosomal imaging and apathy.
What is there in conclusion?
Their conclusion, it's also not some studies showing mild useful, and the other studies are also not clear, sir, regarding this nigrosomal imaging.
Okay. Sir, shall we go to next?
Yeah.
Okay,
What is the
thank you,
next?
Shravan.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Shravan.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Yeah. What is the next paper now?
Sai Neelima?
Second paper is Dr. Soumya, sir,
Okay.
Dr. Soumya.
from Vizag, sir.
Okay.
Sir, good morning, sir. Hello.
Okay, ma, your
Yeah, yeah.
video.
Please carry on.
Okay.
The typical neurological manifestations of COVID-19.
Okay, please carry on. Dr. Soumya. You can start, Dr. Soumya.
Dr. Soumya, are you there? Please start your presentation. Dr. Soumya?
Audio is not coming. Screen.
Hello.
Dr. Soumya? Dr. Soumya, are you there? Your audio is not visible. It's not audible. Soumya, vintage.
Dr. Soumya?
Sir,
Sir,
sir.
good morning, sir. Am I
Please.
audible, sir?
Yeah,
Yeah.
no audible.
Yeah.
Okay, sir.
Please go ahead.
Good morning, respected chairpersons and delegates. I am Dr. Soumya from Andhra Medical College. I'm going to present today an atypical neurological manifestation of COVID-19. So, neurological manifestations have been described in around 1/3 of patients with COVID.
We could not see
and,
your
some
slides.
of-
Yeah.
We could not see your slides, Soumya.
Sir,
Slides, we are not able to visualize.
sir, 1 second. Give me a second. Sir, now is it visible?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Go ahead.
Thank you. So some of these neurological symptoms have proved to be quite specific, like loss of smell or taste, but other ones are non-specific, like headache, dizziness, or reduced level of consciousness. So here we are going to present a case which presented to us in the month of September. A 44-year-old man who was admitted with focal non-motor seizures of 20 days duration. His past medical history did not include any comorbidities like diabetes, hypertension, or asthma, and he was not a known case of epilepsy. The seizure semiology was sudden onset of tonic deviation of eyes to the right side, followed by well-formed visual hallucinations consisting of multiple people in the right visual hemifield, followed by transient blurring of vision in the right visual hemifield. This was followed by return of eyes to the normal position along with return of vision to the baseline. Each episode lasted for around 10 to 15 seconds and occurred at a frequency of one episode for every 10 to 15 minutes. The patient was awake, alert, and responsive during the episode, and there was no history of any perioral automatisms or clonic movements of the limbs. There was no bowel or bladder incontinence or loss of contact with the environment or loss of postural control. The duration and frequency of the episodes kept on increasing gradually, and there was no family history of epilepsy or past history of any myoclonic jerks. The routine blood workup was normal, sir. The hemoglobin was around 11, platelet count was 2.5 lakhs, and there was no evidence of any leukopenia. His CRP and ESR levels were also normal. Blood urea creatinine was normal with normal LFT and lipid profile. His random blood sugar was 520 milligrams per deciliter and his HbA1c was around 8.2. But he did not know of his diabetic status previously. His chest CT revealed multiple peripheral groundless opacities consistent with a CORAD score of 4. His RT-PCR for COVID-19 was sent, which turned out to be negative. And on repeated questioning, he gave a history of fever with myalgia 2 weeks prior to the onset of illness. And COVID-19 antibody testing was done, which turned out to be significantly positive for IgG antibodies. In view of focal encephalitis, CSF herpes simplex virus, IgG and IgM antibodies were sent, which turned out to be negative. And his imaging revealed a small ill-defined focal hyperintense signal in the left occipital area in T2 and flare with corresponding restrictions in DWI images along with ADC reversal. So this is the image, MRI image of the patient, which showed on T1 there was no significant abnormality. On T2 and flare, there was a mild subcortical hypointensity with cortical hyperintensity. And on diffusion weighted images, there was diffusion restriction on the left-sided occipital pole with reversal on ADC. His EEG revealed focal slowing in occipital area with loss of alpha block on eye opening, and his CSF analysis revealed a total cells of 4, all of which were lymphocytes, sugar being 110 milligrams per deciliter and proteins 120 milligrams per deciliter. He was treated conservatively with carbamazepine and steroids, and the patient improved with a reduction in the frequency of episodes to around 1 to 2 episodes in one day. So discussion, sir. There are 3 proposed mechanisms through which coronavirus can enter the CNS. One is retrograde transfer from the olfactory epithelium to the brain through the cribriform plate. Second is damage to the blood-brain barrier during the viremia phase. And third is transfer from the peripheral nerve terminals to CNS through synapse-connected routes. Following CNS invasion, there are 2 methods in which damage can occur. One is an immune-mediated damage in the setting of a cytokine storm, and the second is neuronal damage in the setting of significant hypoxia due to ARDS. And there are a few studies which showed direct viral invasion into the brain cells leading to significant damage. So the diagnosis of COVID-19 related encephalitis can be extremely challenging because definitive diagnosis largely depends on isolation of virus from the CSF, which is difficult for COVID because SARS-CoV-2 dissemination is transient and its CSF titer may be extremely low. And there are very few laboratories which can do antigen or antibody testing in the CSF, sir. And the treatment of COVID-19 related encephalitis is mainly supportive, including steroids, IVIG, immunomodulators like rituximab, and they have also been tried, but majority of them have limited outcomes. The neuronal dysfunction may persist in many cases even after the symptoms of acute illness have been resolved. So conclusion, COVID-19 is primarily a respiratory pathogen, but there is increasing evidence that it infects both the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system, and the absence of any specific findings on EEG, CT head or MRI and CSF analysis essentially makes it a diagnosis of exclusion.
You have his EEG slide, Soumya?
It is a paper for a discussion.
Sir?
You have his EEG slide
Hello?
in hand.
Yeah,
EEG
yeah.
slide.
Sir,
There is
no.
a hyperglycemia for a 520 milligrams
Yes, sir.
for this patient.
Yes,
So
sir.
how can you attribute only to COVID? Maybe related
Sir,
with hyperglycemia also.
Antibodies
yes, sir.
positive.
It could be related to hyperglycemia also, sir. But in view of temporal relationship to fever and the onset of the symptoms around 1 week to 10 days after the onset of fever, and he had significant IgG COVID antibody titer was positive, sir. And also the chest CT also showed persistent groundless opacity, sir. So in view of temporal relation to symptoms, we thought it could be most probably due to COVID, sir. And also the seizures did not improve after control of hyperglycemia with insulin, sir. Only after 1 week to 10 days treatment with carbamazepine and steroids, the frequency of seizures have come down.
You would have focused EEG slide, number 1. Good presentation, okay.
Okay. Next case.
Thank you, sir.
Next, we have Dr. Avinash from NIMS, sir.
Okay.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Are my slides visible, sir?
Yeah, visible.
Efficacy and safety of adjunctive perampanel in patients with focal seizures. Introduction: epilepsy affects approximately 50 million people worldwide and is associated with high economic, social, and psychological burden, particularly in Asia. In India, prevalence is 3 to 11 in 1,000 and incidence is 38 to 16, 1 lakh respectively. Anti-seizure medications are the primary treatment for epilepsy. New anti-seizure medications are often studied in select group of patients in Europe and the USA. However, results in this population do not always translate to the Asian populations given difference in genetic backgrounds. Perampanel, an orally active, non-competitive selective AMPA receptor antagonist, is approved as adjunctive therapy for focal seizures with or without focal to bilateral tonic-clonic seizures in patients aged greater than 12 years in 55 countries and GTCS in patients aged 12 years in 50 countries. Objectives are to assess the efficacy and safety of adjunctive perampanel in patients greater than 12 years with complex partial seizures and secondary generalized tonic-clonic seizures. Study period was 1 year. This was conducted in NIMS. Inclusion criteria: any male or female subject greater than 12 years of age have a diagnosis of epilepsy with partial onset seizures with or without secondary generalization according to ILVA classification of epileptic seizures. Diagnosis must have established by clinical history and EEG that is consistent with diagnosis. Seizure must be uncontrolled before starting the perampanel. A minimum of 3 months of follow-up should be present. Are currently being treated with 1 to 4 another approved IUDs. Exclusion criteria: females who are breastfeeding or pregnant, history of pseudo seizures, and history of status epilepticus that required hospitalization, and evidence of significant active hepatic disease or renal disease. Patient satisfying inclusion and exclusion criteria are added with adjunctive perampanel from 2 mg to a maximum of 8 mg based on tolerability and seizure control. Patients are followed for a minimum of 3 months to 1 year and average of 6 months. Efficacy assessments include mean percentage change in seizure frequency per 28 days, 50% responder rate, that is defined as proportion of patients with greater than 50% reduction in seizure frequency for 28 days and seizure freedom. Safety include monitoring of treatment emergent
at the time we have to share our screen.
Defined as an adverse event with an onset date or worsening in severity from baseline on or after the first dose of study drug. Statistical analysis: category variables are presented as number and percentage, while numerical or continuous variables are presented as mean or median as appropriate. Data was also represented using appropriate diagrams like bar diagram, pie diagram. Data was presented as numbers or mean as appropriate. The p-value less than 0.05 was considered as statistically significant. A total of 20 patients are included in the study. 50% are of age in between 12 to 20 years, 40% are of age in between 21 to 30 years, and 10% are of age in between 31 to 40 years. Sex distribution: males are 55%, females are 45%. Most of the patients have complex partial seizures and remaining 25% patients have secondary generalized tonic-clonic seizures. This is the age distribution: 12 to 20 years of 50%, and sex distribution: males are 55 and females are 45%. Complex partial consist of 75% and secondary generalized tonic-clonic seizures are 25%. The mean percent reduction in seizure frequency per 28 days for perampanel for patients is about 58.32%. 50% responder rate was seen in 60% of patients. Seizure freedom, that is complete resolution of seizures, was seen in 25% of patients. The percent reduction mean is 58. Seizure per month before 5 compa of 21 decreased to after 5 compa of 5.6. Median is percent reduction in seizure of 76%. Seizure before per month before 5 compa from 8 to it decreased to 3 after 5 compa. So the median reduction of seizures before 5 compa to after 5 compa is from 8 to 3. That is p-value is 0.015. That is significant. 50% seizure reduction rate was seen in 60% of patients. Complete seizure freedom was seen in 25% of patients. Adverse effects occurred in 45% of perampanel treated patients, of which observed or weight gain is seen in most of the 35% of patients, aggressiveness in 20% of patients, dizziness in 5%, and suicidal thoughts in 5%. Side effects are seen in 45% of the patients. Limitations: the sample size of the study is small and the long term of the follow-up of the patient is needed. Conclusion: adjunctive perampanel associated with significant greater mean percentage reduction in seizure frequency, 58%. 60% of patients had 50% reduction in seizures. Complete seizure freedom response seen in 25% of patients. Adjunct to perampanel may be a suitable anti-seizure medication for patients with complex partial seizures and secondary generalized tonic-clonic seizures. Further analysis in larger groups of patients may be required to confirm our results.
Have you taken IEC permission for this?
Yeah.
So we can take an ethical permission, sir.
Good presentation.
Show the first slide. Please show the first slide. Because now you're in 2020, you're using all old terminology and old statistics. So just next slide, next slide. So do you want to modify? No, previous slide only. Previous slide. So you have to modify those old things. Next, you are using all old terminology, primary, secondary generation and all. You are a resident, na? You have to use all the recent terminology because it has came in 2017. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay, it is a paper with a different concept. Trying for a new drug.
Yeah,
How
definitely
is your
paper is good,
experience?
but he has not done homework. Paper is good, sir.
Yeah, paper is good.
Okay, thank you.
So can we go on to the next speaker,
Yeah,
sir?
next one. Yeah.
Yeah, next speaker.
Next speaker is Dr. Yamini from SWIMS Tirupati.
Okay.
System of correct, you know.
Good morning, sir. I'm Yamini from SWIMS Tirupati. Am I audible, sir?
Yeah, audible.
Audible.
I'm presenting the genetically confirmed case of myotonia congenita. Myotonia congenita is a rare genetic myopathy due to dominant or recessive mutation in the chloride channel 1 gene on chromosome 7. The objective is to describe the clinical manifestations, electrophysiological findings, and genetic report of myotonia congenita in a patient encountered at SWIMS Tirupati. Coming to the presenting illness, a 20-year-old male presented with difficulty in releasing held objects, that is keys and heavy objects, and warm-up phenomena for making dough, that is with initial difficulty but getting better on repetition of the action, and with difficulty in getting up from sitting and squatting position, and with muscle stiffness in both calves and thighs while climbing steps from his 12 years of age, and without any history of diurnal variation, fatigability, and without worsening of symptoms on exposure to cold, and without history of thinning of limbs, fasciculations, or band-like sensation, and without history of pin and needle sensations, numbness, and without bladder and bowel complaints. With significant family history, here is the pedigree analysis. The patient was born out of consanguineous parentage with similar complaints in the younger brother. Here is the general habitus of the patient with hypertrophy of the bilateral biceps, neck muscles, gluteal muscles, and calf hypertrophy with exaggerated lumbar lordosis, giving Herculean body or athletic body appearance. And on neurological examination, myotonia of eyelid and hand grip present in the form of delayed opening of eyelid and fist, and on percussion, myotonia present. Here is the recording of the hand grip myotonia of the patient. And on examination, muscle power with neck flexors and extensor power was 5/5 with bilateral pectoralis, rhomboid, supraspinatus, trapezius, teres minor and major weakness with right scapular winging, with mild weakness of arm, forearm, and wrist muscles, and with mild hand grip weakness, and with mild weakness of proximal and distal lower limb muscles, with intact deep tendon reflexes and normal superficial reflexes, and with intact sensory and cerebral findings, with waddling gait and with exaggerated lumbar lordosis. CPK levels of the patient was 255 with hemogram, renal function, and liver function tests, and sugar levels are within normal limits, with the ECG showing normal sinus rhythm, with 2D echo showing no regional wall motion abnormality with good LV function, with normal study of the ultrasound abdomen. Electromyogram showed bursts of myotonic discharges with sound of a dive bomber or an accelerating and decelerating motor engine. Myotonic discharges are repetitive discharges that wax and wane in frequency and amplitude. Here is the video recording demonstrated bursts of myotonic discharges. They sound like dive bomber sound, that is accelerating or decelerating motorcycle engine sound. That is a sound of revving engine. In the short exercise protocol, which aided in diagnosis with high sensitivity, it narrows the differential diagnosis where serial compound muscle action potentials are recorded from abductor digiti minimi after supramaximal stimulation of the ulnar nerve at the wrist, and CMAPs are recorded at the baseline and then following every 10 seconds for a total of 60 seconds and then repeated 3 times. Usually 3 patterns of Fourier patterns are observed in short exercise tests in non-dystrophic myotonias, with pattern 1 being observed in disorders like paramyotonia congenita, which demonstrate decrease in CMAP amplitude post-exercise and worsening on subsequent tests. And pattern 2 is recorded in disorders like myotonia congenita, where initial CMAP decrement was seen post-exercise and it returns to baseline after 60 seconds. And on subsequent trials, it returns to baseline. And third type of Fourier pattern is seen in disorders like defect in sodium channel genes with initial increase in CMAP amplitude and returning to baseline later without change in subsequent tests. This is the short exercise protocol of this patient of which showed initial normal amplitude with gross reduction in CMAP amplitude post-exercise, which is returning to normal within 40 seconds, and it returned to baseline within 60 seconds. That is a Fourier type 2 pattern, which was recorded in short exercise test in this patient, which narrowed differential diagnosis in this patient even before genetic analysis. And genetic analysis, DNA sequence analysis identified the homozygous pathogenic mutation in the exon 15 of chloride channel 1 gene, which resulted in amino acid substitution of asparagine for isoleucine at codon 556, thereby confirming the diagnosis of myotonia congenita. The patient was placed on phenytoin with some improvement of clinical myotonia. The purpose of this presentation is to illustrate the generalized muscle hypertrophy and EMG myotonic discharges in a genetically confirmed case of myotonia congenita, which is a rare disorder. And further future genetic study of well-characterized case series from the region will reveal the full spectrum of chloride channel mutations underlying this rare myotonic myopathy and the presence of any founder mutations. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, it's a nice
cost?
paper.
What is the cost of that genetic analysis?
Sir, around 4,000.
Where have you done this?
Sir, MedGenome Laboratories, sir.
You have taken ethics committee. Who has given the money for that? You have taken ethics committee
Sir,
permission?
Yes, sir. We have taken permission, sir, and from institute side we got concession to the patients.
Okay. No, you,
Well, for a testing, what is the need for a ethical committee permission?
Yes, sir.
Because
Because
only
No,
one
when-
case you have studied.
yes, sir. Only one case.
Okay,
Genetically proven case, sir. Only one case.
one case. Okay.
how will you distinguish clinically autosomal recessive versus autosomal dominant myotonia congenita? 1 or 2 points.
Sir, autosomal dominant congenita symptoms started birth, sir.
Yes.
Birth, sir. Age of onset of
Okay, one is onset.
at birth, sir. Usually at birth, sir.
Okay, one is onset. Any other points to distinguish? AR versus AD myotonia congenita.
Severity, sir. Severity
Okay,
usually
okay, good.
more in recessive.
Okay.
Okay, right.
Thank you, sir.
Good paper.
Sir, can we
Next
move on to the
paper.
next presentation, sir?
Yeah, definitely.
It's by Dr. Raghunandani from SWIMS Tirupati.
Okay.
Dr. Raghunandani, please share your slides. Dr. Raghunandani.
Not there.
Dr. Raghunandani is there?
Okay, we'll go to next speaker.
Okay, sir. The next speaker is
Next speaker is ready.
Dr. Chandrasekhar. Are you ready?
Chandrasekhar.
Dr. Chandrasekhar, are you ready? Dr. Chandrasekhar. Dr.
Chandrasekhar. Anyone is ready? Srikanth?
Dr. Shrikant. Dr. Shri-
Chandrasekhar.
Yes, sir, I'm ready, sir.
Yeah, please proceed. Chandrasekhar.
Yeah.
Chandrasekhar, sir. PSP variant, I think. Chandrasekhar?
Yeah.
Sir, yes, sir, I'm ready, sir.
Yeah, please focus your slides. Any problem, Chandrasekhar?
Sir, yes, sir. 1 minute, sir. 1 minute. I'm focusing, sir.
Yeah, he's getting ready. It's a-
Sir, visible, sir, my slide?
If his slides not visible, Chandrasekhar.
Not visible, sir.
Not visible.
Now, sir, not visible, sir.
No, not visible.
Yep. Share your screen.
Okay, sir. Yes, sir.
Raghunandini.
Okay, sir. I'll share my slides, sir.
Okay, so then can we have Chandrasekhar as the next speaker? Can we proceed with Dr. Nandini, sir?
Okay.
So Dr. Nandini, please start your presentation.
Okay. Good morning, sir.
Yeah, good. Please start, Nandini.
Sir, ఇక్కడ ఏం చేస్తారు? Screen sharing అంటే రాలేదు నాకు.
A rare. Audio is not clear, I think.
Dr. Nandini, your audio is not clear. Dr. Nandini, your audio is not clear.
Coming to the introduction, pyroxene is a new conventional chemical that acts as a miticide and insecticide.
వాళ్ళకి కనిపిస్తుంది గోపి సార్ ఉన్న నీ టాక్ విన్నాను నేను అన్ని అయినాయి నాకు.
Now, sir.
వినిపిస్తుంది నాకు రఘునందన్ లిస్ట్ లో కనిపించట్లేదా? ఏంటి మరి
Audio is
స్క్రీన్ షేర్ ఉంది, స్క్రీన్ ఉంది. We cannot while the others.
Nandini, your audio is not clear. Please make sure it's more clear.
శ్రీకాంత్ ఉంది నా శ్రీకాంత్ మా బ్రదర్ ల్యాప్టాప్ కదా. శ్రీకాంత్
Chandrasekhar.
యా
Chandrasekhar.
Yeah.
అవునవును నాది ఇది ఉంది కదా శ్రీకాంత్.
Chandrasekhar.
PSP frontal variant.
Yeah, Chandrasekhar.
Chandrasekhar, if you are ready, you can start your presentation.
Is Dr. Chandrasekhar ready? Is Dr. Srikanth ready?
Yes, madam. I am ready, madam.
Yeah, please go ahead, Srikanth.
A clinical study of and on utility of nerve biopsy in peripheral neuropathy. Right, that's Srikanth. Transference.
Is my screen visible, sir?
Yeah, visible.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
visible. Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, sir. I'm Srikanth from neurology resident from SIMS Tirupati. My presentation today is on yield of nerve biopsy in peripheral neuropathy in the routine clinical setting. My presentation will be covered in the following headings: introduction, objective, materials and methods, results and discussion. Introduction: peripheral neuropathy is a commonly encountered neurological problem in a routine clinical setting, and full diagnosis of peripheral neuropathy requires a detailed approach, a systematic approach, and detailed electrophysiological assessment, essential laboratory testing, and at times whenever indicated nerve biopsy is required. And the indications for nerve biopsy are whenever there is suspicion of vasculitis, infections such as leprosy, HIV, tumor infiltration, amyloidosis, atypical presentation of CIDP, neurolymphomatosis, or toxic neuropathies. A prospective study by Gabriel et al. Has shown that nerve biopsy altered the therapeutic management in nearly 60% of cases. The objective of this study was to assess the yield of nerve biopsy in the etiological diagnosis of peripheral neuropathy in a patient cohort at SWIMS. And methods, so this is a prospective observational study. It was done from March 2019 to December 2020, including patients with electroclinical diagnosis of peripheral neuropathy who underwent nerve biopsy for etiological diagnosis. All patients were subjected to detailed clinical examination, electrophysiological testing, and essential laboratory investigations. And the yield of nerve biopsy in the diagnosis and management was expressed as percentage. Results. Totally 100 patients were approached to participate in the study, out of which 18 patients did not give informed consent for nerve biopsy and they were excluded. And 82 patients were included in the study and who underwent nerve biopsy. And results, a mean age of presentation was 42.7 years, ranging from 5 to 74 years. And majority of them were men, nearly 59.75%, and women were around 40.24%. And the majority of patients were in the age group 31 to 60%, which contributed to around 70% of patients. And a temporal profile, a majority of the patients had chronic onset, nearly 70%, followed by subacute onset, which was seen nearly 20%, and acute onset was seen nearly 10% of patients. And lower limb weakness distribution as per history was predominantly distal plus proximal weakness, which was in nearly 53.6% of patients, followed by distal weakness, which was seen in 18.29%, and followed by proximal weakness. And lower limb weakness was not seen in nearly 20% of patients. And lower limb weakness distribution as per examination was predominantly distal plus proximal, which was in nearly 35% of patients, and followed by distal weakness, which was nearly 25% of patients, and proximal was nearly 5% of patients. And upper limb weakness distribution as per history was predominantly distal weakness, which was nearly 31% of patients, followed by distal plus proximal, which was nearly 18% of patients, followed by proximal. And upper limb weakness was not seen in nearly 47% of patients. And upper limb weakness distribution as per examination was predominantly distal weakness, followed by distal plus proximal, followed by proximal. And no upper limb weakness was seen in nearly 57.3% of patients. And predominant sensory complaints was paresthesias, followed by numbness and burning and cotton wool sensations. And overall, wasting was seen in nearly 10% of patients. Reflexia was seen in nearly 81% of patients, and peripheral nerve thickening was seen in 13% of patients, and autonomic dysfunction was seen in one patient, and positive rhombox was seen in nearly 44% of patients. And on ENMG evaluation, on electrophysiological evaluation, ENMG showed a predominantly axonal pattern in nearly 68% of patients, followed by mixed pattern, that is axonal plus demyelination in nearly 20.7% of patients, followed by unclassified pattern, which was nearly 6% of patients, followed by demyelinating pattern, which was seen in nearly 4.8% of patients. And nerve biopsy results, majority of the patients had features of chronic axonopathy, that is nearly seen in 46.34% of patients, which doesn't point to any specific diagnosis and which can be considered as non-contributory. And this was followed by vasculitic features, which was in nearly 25.6% of patients, followed by features of CIDP and CIDP, Hansen's, and hereditary neuropathy, which was seen in nearly 7.3% of patients. This was followed by diabetic neuropathy features, which was seen in nearly 3.65% of patients. And in two patients, diagnostic opinion was not possible. In that, one patient had fibrofatty tissue in the specimen, which was probably not a nerve specimen, and one patient had normal nerve findings. And clinical versus histopathological correlation. Clinically, 21 patients were suspected to have CIDP, out of which 5 patients had features of CIDP, and 6 patients had features of chronic axonopathy, and 5 patients had features of vasculitic neuropathy, and 2 patients had features of Hansen's disease, and 2 patients had features of diabetic neuropathy, and one patient had features of hereditary neuropathy. Clinically, 15 patients were suspected to have sensory ataxic neuropathy, out of which 4 patients had features of vasculitic neuropathy, and other patients nerve biopsy was non-contributory. Clinically, 15 patients had 15 patients had features of vasculitic neuropathy, out of which 9 patients confirmed the diagnosis of vasculitic neuropathy on biopsy, and 5 patients biopsy was non-contributory, and 1 patient had features of diabetic neuropathy. Clinically, 11 patients were suspected to have Hansen's disease, out of which biopsy confirmed Hansen's in 3% of 3 patients, and 1 patient had features of CIDP, and in 8 patients, biopsy was non-contributory. Clinically, mononeuritis multiplex was suspected in 5 patients, out of which 1 patient had features of Hansen's, and 3 patients biopsy was non-contributory. That they had features of chronic axonopathy, and 1 patient had features of hereditary neuropathy. Clinically, hereditary neuropathy was suspected in 6 patients, and out of which 6 patients had features of hereditary neuropathy. And clinically, 4 patients are suspected to have diabetic neuropathy, and out of which 1 patient had features of vasculitic neuropathy, and 3 patients had features of chronic axonopathy. And 7 patients had suspected to have nutritional neuropathy, out of which 1 patient had features of CIDP on biopsy, and 2 patients had features of vasculitic features, and 4 patients on our biopsy was having features of chronic axonopathy. Overall, the yield of nerve biopsy was 48.78%, and nerve biopsy altered the diagnosis in 32.9% of patients, and significantly influenced the management in 47.5% of patients. Conclusion: our study illustrates the diverse etiological spectrum of peripheral neuropathy requiring nerve biopsy, and nerve biopsy with an overall diagnostic yield of 49% has favorably influenced the management decision in nearly half of enrolled cases.
Can you go to the second slide? Indications of nerve biopsy. Why you have written atypical presentation of CIDP?
Some patients may present with
second slide. Next slide. No, indication.
Like asymmetrical.
You said atypical presentation of CIDP. Is it true? You have not done biopsy to all patients of CIDP, only atypical presentations you have done biopsy?
What are the atypical presentations of CIDP which procure for a nerve biopsy?
One is the multifocal pattern of distribution, sir.
Okay,
No, sir is asking what are the different types, atypical presentations. Yeah, there's so many different types now. What are the various types? Why you have done only for those?
Sir, yes, sir. Distal. One is the symmetrical, sir. One is the DAT, sir. Distal acquired demyelinating.
Before DATs, anything else?
Pure motor, sir. Pure motor, pure sensory, and one is the LS Lewis-Sumner syndrome, sir. And
no, what are the different diagnosis of CIDP? Forget about this. Definitive diagnosis of CIDP is by?
A definitive diagnosis by one is criteria, sir. European criteria.
No. For definitive diagnosis of CIDP, you have the criteria only I'm asking. You have definitive, possible, probable.
Yes,
for
sir.
definitive diagnosis of CIDP, you have mandatory clinical criteria, mandatory exclusion criteria, mandatory lab criteria. In the
Yes,
mandatory lab criteria, you have 3. So definitive is by biopsy.
Yes, sir.
So when you are not doing biopsy and you are doing biopsy only for atypical presentations, how can you get a good result?
Sir, in my study, I have done a biopsy in all CIDP patients, sir.
But why you have kept this indications for biopsies, atypical presentations?
You need to include this another point, nerve biopsy for a CIDP also in this slide. That's what he's telling.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you have axonal variants of CIDP also. That
Yes.
also can be many variants are axonal variants. That also you have to look whether they are CIDP axonal variants or not. Because CIDP is one of the commonest neuropathy we come across. But in your study, we CIDP, the cases are less. So you have to think again.
Okay, sir.
Undetermined etiology of neuropathies also sometimes you need to go for a nerve biopsy.
Yes. Okay, sir.
Yeah.
Okay,
chronic axonopathy you have mentioned, which is a commonest finding in the nerve biopsy. What could be the etiology?
Chronic axonopathy.
Yeah, commonest.
One is
CIDP, long-standing CIDP patients.
Yeah, axonal variants of CIDP. Though it is demyelinating, you may get axonal variants.
Axonal variant, yeah.
Okay. That also you have to consider.
Okay.
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 Good paper. Good work.
Good presentation.
Thank you, sir.
Can we go on to the next speaker, sir?
Okay.
The next speaker is Dr. Lanka Gautam Mukesh from Narayana Medical College, Nellore. Dr. Gautam, are you ready? Dr. Gautam?
Dr. Gautam?
Yes, sir. I'm ready, sir. I'm sharing.
Yeah. Predictive factor for the severity of acute anterior and posterior circulation stroke, an observational study on seacoast population of Nellore.
Yes, sir. Can you see my slides, sir?
Yeah, you are able to visualize your slides. Audio is also good. You can proceed.
Good morning, one and all. I'm Dr. Gautam Mukesh, final year DMPG, Department of Neurology, Narayana Medical College, Bangalore. Today, my topic of presentation is predictive factors for severity of acute anterior and posterior circulation strokes, an observational study in the seacoast population of Nellore. Stroke is a catastrophic life-changing event which influences not only stroke patients but also their families and caregivers. Progress has been made in reducing deaths from stroke despite the advent of intravenous tissue-type plasminogen activator as a specific treatment for selected patients with acute ischemic stroke in therapeutic window, and the promise of other intervention therapies. Still, the best approach is to decrease the stroke burden is effective prevention. Stroke is considered as a disease which can be developed by long-lasting exposure to risk factors related to lifestyle. Modification of such risk factors should greatly affect the incidence of stroke and even mortality rates. Primary prevention is particularly important because 77% of strokes are first events. The risk of a first stroke can be lowered by 80% in people who practice a healthy lifestyle compared with those who do not. The main aim of my study is to identify the predictive factors for severity at presentation of acute anterior and posterior circulation strokes, where the literature, the data is a bit sparse. The objectives include the factors under various subheadings like epidemiological factors, clinical factors, and investigatory parameters affecting the severity of anterior and posterior circulation strokes, and finally to identify the independent predictors. The study design is a prospective observational study for a period of 16 months from December 2018 to March 2020. The sample size included 564 study population, and the patients attending the OP and IP with acute stroke to the Department of Neurology, Narayana Medical College were included. The inclusion criteria, as already told, all the patients with acute stroke presenting to IP and OP to Narayana Medical College were included, and patients with hemorrhagic stroke, CVT, intracranial space occupying lesions, subarachnoid hemorrhage, and who are brought dead with a diagnosis of stroke were excluded. The patients are recruited according to the above criteria. Informed consent from either the patient attender were taken. Demographic data, past medical history, and awareness of risk factors, knowledge of symptoms, and stroke management, including thrombolytics, antiplatelets, were noted for the patient, from the patient or relatives of the patient. Knowledge regarding rehabilitation also was obtained. Clinical profile investigations, imaging with CT or MRI were done. Severity at the time of admission was assessed by NIHS score. Stroke is classified by TOAST. Coming to the results, all the ischemic stroke patients who were included in the study were 564, and among them anterior circulation were 361, posterior circulation 164, and multiple strokes were 39, as mentioned. Coming to the baseline characteristics of the study population, age group, most of the patients in the study population were between the age of 61 to 80 age group, and the next followed by 41 to 60 years. In both the study populations equally distributed. In gender, most of them were males in the study population, followed by females, which accounted only for 35-40%. Awareness of the risk factors, awareness of the stroke management and rehabilitation. Most of the study population knew about physiotherapy, but very less about the other risk factors and management. The residents, most of them are from the rural area, that is accounting to 65 to 70%, followed by urban and then semi-urban. Education level, most of them were having nil education, followed by secondary education level. The marital status, most of them were married, that is accounting to 90%. The employment status, most of them were housewives, that is, among the study population, about 25 to 30% were housewives, followed by the various other groups, including unemployed, next coming unemployed, which is around 20%, as you can see. And most of them are Hindus, followed by Muslims and Christians. Economic status wise, both the study populations included low economic status as a majority of the study population, which included 60%, and followed by upper middle class, which is around 20%. With the risk factors comparison between the two groups, this shows that the previous history of stroke was more in anterior circulation rather than the posterior circulation.
Technical or
These were all the variables included under the epidemiological factors were analyzed to see if there is any influence on the severity, including demographics, awareness of the stroke risk factors, stroke treatment, rehabilitation, past medical history, stroke in young, vascular risk factors, family history of any coronary heart disease or stroke, history of hormone replacement therapy, history of substance abuse, and the delays are also considered because we wanted to see any issues and challenges in the stroke where we can manage. And these are the clinical variables which included symptoms pertaining to the stroke, including headache, vomiting, giddiness, double vision, blurring of vision, weakness, paralysis, and other signs which include on examination, which included pallor, vitals including blood, BP, heart rate, temperature, respiratory rate. GCS also was noted at the time of admission, and MRS also was noted at the time of admission. And these are the investigatory parameters which we looked into, mostly the imaging and also the blood workup. On analysis, for the anterior circulation stroke patients, the univariate analysis was done, and when done, these are the factors which were showing significance in the anterior circulation stroke patients. In epidemiological factors, the previous history of stroke, ischemic stroke, and obesity, dyslipidemia were all the factors which are significant. In clinical factors, weakness, difficulty in speech, drooping of upper eyelid, deviation of mouth, unsteadiness of gait, GCS grading at admission, sensory abnormalities, abnormal gait, MRS grading at admission, higher mental function which is abnormal at the time of admission, and imaging and lab parameters including total counts, NL ratio, potassium, dose, and infarct vessel, which is determined by the imaging. And when multivariate analysis was done among these factors to find out the independent predictors for severity in anterior circulation stroke, we have found out that the presence of previous history of stroke and symptoms like unsteadiness of gait and higher mental function, along with sensory abnormalities and GCS at the time of admission were found to be significant independent predictors. In the posterior circulation stroke patients, when evaluated for the factors for severity, the epidemiological factors, including history of PTCA, first evaluated where the patient was evaluated was a person.
Hello? Voice is not clear.
Yeah.
Not audible.
Sir, Dr. Gautam's audio has been disconnected, sir. Like he'll be ready, he'll be continuing within another 5 seconds, it seems, sir.
Okay, correct. లేదు అక్కడ
Sir, sorry for the interruption.
Yeah, okay, go ahead.
Okay, it's okay.
Sir, can I continue, sir?
Yeah, please continue.
You can go ahead.
These were the univariate analysis findings in the posterior circulation stroke patients.
Okay.
When these were analyzed, these factors and the independent predictors were detected for posterior circulation stroke severity, which include when the patient is unable to ambulate at the time of stroke onset was found to be significant. And reason for delay, that is which occurred at odd hours, so that is delay more than 4.5 hours at presentation, was also found to be significant. and mild GCS score at the time of presentation was a favorable factor found for the severity. So it is towards a mild severity. So conclusions, our study observed presence of previous history of stroke, abnormal higher mental functions, GCS at admission, unsteadiness of gait and sensory abnormalities as independent predictors for severity of acute anterior circulation strokes, and GCS at admission for both actually at admission, and delay at presentation more than 4.5 hours as event occurred at odd hours, and inability to ambulate when event occurred were found to be independent predictors for severity of acute posterior circulation strokes. These are the references which I've included.
Nice paper. What is the single most predictor in your study for the severity in anti-circulation stroke versus post-circulation stroke, both?
With the multivariate analysis, what we have got, the GCS was a major single factor at presentation. GCS grading was pointing towards mild severity, sir, which is more significant, that is 0.000 as shown here. So patient presenting with mild GCS has a better severity, that is mild severity at presentation.
In your paper, you have shown that sensory abnormality is having an independent predictor for a severity of anti-circulation stroke. How can you explain?
Yes, sir. We were also expecting it to be in the posterior circulation strokes, which has come in the anterior circulation for significance. It also depended because this is symptoms, sir. As the patient has told us that he has sensory symptoms, so symptoms are taken from the patient's perspective, sir. On examination, he didn't have. So
it's okay.
Based on that, many rural population patients who presented to us, they give the symptom as sensory also. So based on that, it has come significant, sir.
Okay.
What is TOAST?
So TOAST is classification for.
What is TOAST stands for?
The trial of ORG 10172 in acute stroke treatment, sir.
Okay.
Okay, sir.
Okay, nice paper.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Shall we proceed for the next paper?
Yes.
Sir. The next paper is by Dr. Raghunandini, Swims Tirupati, sir.
Dr. Nandini?
Swims Tirupati, sir.
Good morning, sir.
Yeah.
Am I audible, sir?
Yeah.
Please
Sir,
proceed.
today I am going to present a rare case of accidental fenpyroxamate poisoning presenting as acute neurotoxicity. Fenpyroxamate is a new conventional chemical that acts as a miticide and insecticide. It interferes with energy production via mitochondrial electron transport at NADH coenzyme Q oxidoreductase, that is complex 1. It is mainly used in tea, chili, and coconut crops. So this puts the farmers at risk of accidental exposure to these agents. We report a rare case of accidental exposure to fenpyroxamate poisoning presenting as acute neurotoxicity. This is a case of 26 years old male who developed sudden loss of consciousness an hour after accidental inhalation of fenpyroxamate mitigate while spraying in his field. He was transferred from primary care hospital after ET and mechanical ventilation in view of low GCS. Later, he was referred here for further management. He regained consciousness after few hours gradually and weaned off a ventilator. In about 24 hours post-exposure, he had noticed tingling and numbness in his feet, difficulty in standing up from sitting posture, and crippling attacks on attempted walking. He was swaying while walking, requiring 2% support for walking short distance. He denied presence of any past neurological illnesses. On examination, his general examination was normal. CNS examination, higher mental function, speech, and cranial nerves were normal. Tone is normal, and power is plus 5/5 in upper limbs and minus 4/5 in both lower limbs. Patient has difficulty in walking on toes and heels. His reflexes were 2+ in upper limbs and absent in both lower limbs. Plantars were bilateral mute. On sensory examination, patient has loss of pinprick and temperature sensation up to ankle, and loss of joint position and vibration sense in both lower limbs. Cerebellar examination was normal. He has a broad-based gait with ataxia, and Romberg's was positive. His blood complete blood picture, LFT, RFTs was normal. His serum cholinesterase levels were within normal limits. This is a MRI brain of corpus callosum hyperintensities. MRI spine was normal. This is a DW and ADC MRI of the patient. Bilateral putamen lesions showing T2 shine through splenic in T2 shine through in bilateral putamen and splenium and corpus callosum showing restricted diffusion in these areas. And this is a nerve conduction studies of the patient showing motor conduction showing decreased compound motor action potential amplitudes in bilateral common peroneal nerves when recorded from the EDG, and it was normal from anterior tibialis. Right and left superficial peroneal conduction sensory conductions are not recordable. Right and left median sensory was not sensory conductions was normal, whereas right and left sural conduction showed normal distal latency and conduction velocity with reduced sensory nerve action potentials. Peroneal nerve effects from bilateral left and right and left peroneal nerves were showed normal latency with persistence of less than 50%. H reflex was not absent. This patient was treated conservatively with coenzyme Q and symptomatic therapy. Later advised further follow-up. Coming to the discussion, this is a complex one pesticide which is neurotoxic to astrocytes when cultured by in vitro bioassays. Our patient had a combination of
Any problem?
Dr. Nandini? Dr. Nandini?
Both audio, video, not visible.
Dr. Nandini, are you there?
Audio, video, and
Both.
line.
Anyone from SWIMS?
Sir, shall we go on to next
Yeah,
speaker? Sir,
Chandrasekhar.
yes.
Chandrasekhar paper actually. PSP frontal variant. Chandrasekhar, are you ready?
Dr.
Chandrasekhar? Chandrasekhar?
Not.
Chandrasekhar?
Second.
Yeah, Chandrasekhar is ready, I think. Chandrasekhar?
Sir, yes, sir, ready, sir. 1 minute, sir. Is it visible, sir?
Not visible. Chandrasekhar, not visible.
Not visible, and audio also should improve.
Okay, visible, Chandrasekhar. Proceed, Chandrasekhar. Audio not visible, Chandrasekhar.
Audio, sir.
Audio not audible, video visible. Slides visible.
Chandrasekhar, are you able to hear?
Yes, sir, I am able to hear you, sir.
Yeah, your voice is very faint. You need to improve the loudness.
Yes, go ahead. Chandrasekhar, proceed.
Okay, sir. Sir, good morning, respected panel members and delegates. Myself, Dr. Chandrasekhar from.
Voice, you need to improve.
You raise the voice in your laptop. Okay. Okay, Chandrasekhar, proceed.
PSP frontal variant, sir, is the case report. And coming to the introduction, sir, PSP, progressive supranuclear palsy, also known as Steele-Richardson syndrome, it is the most common degenerative form of the atypical Parkinsonism with mean age of onset at 65 years. And the classical clinical presentation is characterized by unexplained falls, symmetrically predominant axial rigidity, bradykinesia, poor levodopa responsiveness, and supranuclear ophthalmoplegia. And there are various types of phenotypes of PSP have been described, sir, like PSP-RS, that is Richardson syndrome, it is the classical variant, and PSP-P is the Parkinsonism type, and PSP-C is the cerebellar type, and PSP-F, as I will be discussing in my case report, is the PSP frontal variant, and PSP-SL, it is the speech or language variant, and PSP-PAGF is the pure akinesia with gait freezing, and PSP-PLS, it is a primary lateral sclerosis variant, and PSP-CBD is a corticobasal degeneration type, and PSP-OMD is the oculomotor dysfunction, and PSP-PA is postural instability type. These various phenotypes are described based on what features are early and predominant, but this distinction fades with the progression of the disease and the development of the other features of the PSP. So it's very important to identify which features develop first in a patient with PSP. And coming to the case report, sir, is a 40-year span presented with behavioral and memory disturbances for the past 7 months and slowness of the daily activities for 5 months. To start with, initially the patient had behavioral symptoms in the form of apathy, anhedonia, and socially inappropriate behavior in the form of avoiding in the public places, anxiety, and increased predilection for the speed, which is the recent onset change in the behavior. And later memory disturbances started in the form of predominant executive dysfunction and later slowness of daily activities for which the patient is taking more time than previously. And also while walking, the patient is not in par with his wife. But there is no history of any falls or motor or sensory or cerebellar or bowel and bladder dysfunction. On examination, sir, MMSE he scored out 10 points out of 30. His flattened mood and emotional status is noted. Coming to the lobar function test, his verbal fluency and Luria tests and motor pattern tests are severely impaired, with fund of information is relatively good. And he's also having positive applause and FAB score, that is the frontal assessment battery, he scored 4 out of 18 points, which is suggestive of predominant frontal executive dysfunction, whereas the temporal, parietal, and occipital lobe functions are completely spared in this patient. There is slowing of horizontal saccades with impaired vertical gaze, both for the upward and downward gaze. Axial rigidity is more than appendicular. There is hyperreflexia noted with symmetrically brisk deep tendon reflexes and bilateral mentalis reflexes positive. And tests for bradykinesia are positive with blink rate of 4 per minute. And on full test, the patient took more than 2 steps backwards, but recovery is there on full test. This is the MRI image of the patient, sir, which is showing normal brainstem, midbrain pons and medulla are normal. Only mild cerebral atrophy is there. Remaining brainstem segments and ventricles all are normal, and no space occupying lesions. And this is the PET scan of the patient, which is showing hypometabolism in the bilateral frontal, bilateral temporal, posterior parietal, bilateral basal ganglia, and thalamus and brainstem, which is suggestive of PSP frontotemporal dementia spectrum with severe involvement of the frontal cortex. And remaining parallel of investigations are normal, sir, including the CSF. And coming to the discussion part, PSP frontal variant is characterized by cognitive or behavioral change attributed to the frontal lobe dysfunction, mimicking the behavioral variant FTD. So it's very important to differentiate between these two. And PSP frontal variant, it accounts for 5% of the total PSP cases, and also the diagnostic criteria, which is given latest in the 2017 for the PSP by the Movement Disorder Society, includes frontal cognitive or behavioral dysfunction. Differentiating PSP frontal variant from behavioral variant FTD is difficult in the early stages. And so the how to differentiate between these two is by the lobar features. There can be a clue to both of these syndromes. The lobar features seen in the PSP-F includes apathy, frontal lobe release times, and impaired motor lurias, return sequences, and impaired alternating motor pattern tests like fixed edge palm test. Whereas those seen in FTD, behavioral variant FTD include disinhibition, poor naming, and word finding difficulty. So, and also the hummingbird sign on mid-sagittal plane with rostral brainstem atrophy and concavity is observed only in 67% of the pathologically confirmed PSP cases. And according to the MDS PSP 2017 criteria, supporting imaging clues for diagnosis include either the midbrain atrophy or hypometabolism on the PET scan. So coming to the conclusion part, this case highlights PSP frontal variant with normal brainstem imaging on the MRI with FDG PET scan showing characteristic findings with severe frontal cortex involvement. So the differentiation of this frontal variant of PSP from PSP FTD spectrum is important because PSP frontal variant patients are not so much impaired as compared to the so much impaired type of PSP frontotemporal dementia patients, and may be helpful in delineating the different treatment approaches. Thank you, sir. And these are my references.
Yeah. What is the percentage of this frontal variant of PSP?
5%, sir, of the total PSP. This subtype accounts for only 5%, sir.
Okay.
What is your commonest variant, Chandrasekhar?
The commonest variant is the Richardson syndrome. Sir. The classic type is the most common.
Richardson syndrome. Okay.
Richardson syndrome.
Okay, sir.
Okay, okay. Nice
Okay,
paper.
Chandrasekhar. Good.
Good. Next
Uh,
paper. D.
So next paper, sir, Syed Tazim is not responding, Dr. Syed Tazim. So can we continue with Dr. Raghunandini's presentation?
Yeah.
So that is the last, I think. We are coming close to 9:30.
Yes,
Ours
sir.
lecture is there.
Yes, sir.
We have to complete by 9:30 at least, 9:34.
Yes. The last speaker is not responding, sir, Dr.
Yeah, no
Syed
problem.
Tazim.
Even if she responds, we should not consider because time is over. We'll consider only one.
Yeah, Nandini, I think few slides are left. I think she can continue.
Dr. Nandini, are you ready? Dr. Nandini?
No, sir. Yes.
Dr. Nandini, are you ready?
She was not there, I think.
Sir. Okay, sir. Then can we close the session, sir?
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Thank you very much for giving the opportunity.
Sir,
Thank
so
you.
much,
Thank
sir.
you for AP Neurocon 2020 organizing committee for giving the opportunity.
Thank you, sir. We are
Thank you.
fortunate to have you as a chairperson, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you very much. We are eager to
Thank
have
you.
lecture from our sir, our professor, Dr. Venkateshwar sir. Thank
Yes,
you.
sir. Yes.
Thank you.